Frodo. It's over now.
Welcome back to another book review. It's been a long time coming, but it took me a long time to get through Logos Rising. 740-page book, not including the bibliography and the index in the end. So it is done. I wrapped it up earlier today. Feels kind of relieving, to be honest, folks. It was a good book, and we'll get into it, but it's kind of a relief to know that I'm finally going to be able to enjoy a number of the other books that are on my shelf that I've kind of been itching to read, but really want to stick to just finishing out a book. I don't want to start opening books, reading the first couple chapters, putting a bookmark in it, and then moving on to another book. It's not ideal. So let's go into it. First of all, this one's not on Amazon, just so you know. E. Michael Jones is a very well-known, I guess, former professor from St. Mary's College across the street from Notre Dame in Indiana. He is a well-known Catholic, and we'll get into that. But this book is not on Amazon, and I don't quite know why. I can maybe guess. This is interesting. I think he actually only might be selling one book on Amazon of his own, and the rest are on Fidelity Press, which is I believe it's his store. And I did get it from here, and I did go ahead and get the signed edition. Why not? It was, $15 extra. Might as well get it signed by the author. And it took about 3 to 4 weeks to arrive. I imagine he gets a copy eventually, he signs it, and he sends it back to his shipper. Probably something like that. So, yeah. I ordered it. Took maybe 3 to 4 weeks to get it, but yeah, when you open up the pamphlet, the very first covers in the inside, it's his signature, which is cool. So it's a signed book. It's the only book that I have that is legitimately autographed. So I like that. Now let's get into the nitty gritty of the review. So basically, like I just said, it's a super long book. It's not sold on Amazon. Took 2 to 3 weeks. We talked about that. It's written in a very formal style, I'll say. He uses a ton of citations. I think each chapter maybe has, on average, 250 citations, something like that. It's in the hundreds. So in the book, he's basically cited and quoted directly other books, other authors, maybe a few thousand times, no joke. Some of the chapters are very much, taking excerpts from former books and him opining on it or giving his factual analysis of it. So there's a lot of direct quotes and citations, and I guess I'm drawing a blank on the word I'm trying to say, but sometimes he takes entire paragraphs of other books and puts them in his book. So not a problem with that. He uses some pretty big words, though. I literally found I'm not the smartest guy, right? I'm probably IQ like 120. He takes pretty big words, throws them in there. He doesn't have a dictionary in the back. He has an index and a bibliography, so I had to look up things like pantheism, which I had heard of, but I had to do a little bit of a refresher on what that meant, as well as fideism. Fideism is not a word I had ever heard before, but it's used often in his book. So if you're not super versed on the vocabulary, put the book down, look up the words, so you don't get through the whole book not knowing what he's talking about. And on that note, he uses a lot of references to Latin words, and sometimes I don't recall that they're actually explained. So you'll see a lot of italics. You'll see a lot of Latin phrases and words in italics. You may want to look those up as well. Let's get into some more of the details. The first chapter I didn't feel like I was particularly grabbed, but the first chapter pretty much tells you what the format of all the remaining chapters are. And that's basically him taking a particular philosopher in history or a theologist or both and commenting on it. So the first one, he basically debunks and kind of just flails Bertrand Russell. I'm going to be honest, I don't know a lot about Bertrand Russell, but I'm pretty sure he's very liked in the atheist community. Could be wrong about that, but I believe that's who kind of leans towards Bertrand Russell. So I kind of picked up on the format. Every remaining chapter basically centers around one to a few figures of philosophy or theology of the time period that he's talking about. So in the beginning, it definitely reminded me of The Irrational Atheist by Box Day, which was similar. Like, he's bringing up Dawkins and Hitchens in the exact same way that Box did. So it was almost a little bit of a reread, but with Jones's take on it, and basically destroying their arguments for evolution by saying it's pretty simple. I'm probably drawing a blank here, but it's that which is cannot come from that which is not. Like, something does not come from nothing, hence it's bullshit. Okay. There was a chapter that I really remember I started getting into the book when he was talking about Greeks and the polis, and this is when Greek philosophers were introduced, and that's when things get really interesting, because I don't know a whole lot about Aristotle, Plato, Socrates, and I didn't realize that they were kind of in a line. If I'm not mistaken, I can't remember which was first. Aristotle was, I want to say, the student of Socrates, who was the student of Plato. Or maybe reverse that. Socrates was the teacher of Plato, who was the teacher of Aristotle. Aristotle was the teacher of Alexander the Great, who went on to found the Greek Empire, which was, which was the largest empire of the time of the Mediterranean until it fell. I did actually pull this right here. If you're looking at my screen, there's an actual website. Plato and Aristotle, how do they differ on Britannica? He does get into Christianity, which I thought was pretty cool. I mean, the whole book is centered around Jesus Christ being Logos in the flesh. The whole book is, the premise is basically that we are either Logos or anti-Logos, no matter what we do. He really introduced me well to Paul. I'm going to be honest, I actually thought Paul was one of the original 12. I'm an idiot. I didn't realize he came after Jesus' death. And also John the Evangelist. So really good sections on that. Things got really interesting for me when he talked about Islam. I really didn't realize how much Islam is actually kind of a schism of Christianity itself. I always thought it was just some kind of desert religion that kind of borrowed from Judaism and Christianity, but it really is, according to E. Michael Jones, if you read about it, it's really the schism that is born out of a Christian heresy of, essentially thinking that Jesus was not God himself, but just a prophet. But I want to say that's called Arianism, and lead it to something called Avranism, something like that. But yeah, Islam was doing pretty well until the barbaric versions of them wiped out the smart ones, straight up. So that's what we have today. Islam was a very philosophical and scientific community up until maybe 900 or 1000 or something like that. There was a great section on Martin Luther. So I should probably stick this at the end, but if you looked at my last video, I think my last book was Reclaiming the Catholic Church by the Kurgan, who very much does not like E. Michael Jones. And funny thing is, they both have things in common. Like Martin Luther, the chapter on Martin Luther was enlightening, which is a funny word, but I did not like. Kurgan always told us how much of a nunfucker he was, but man, E. Michael Jones really gets into the details. I mean, Luther would literally pull up a cart and sneak nuns out of the monasteries and the churches and fuck them and set them up with his friends who were leaving the Catholic Church as well. So yeah, every Protestant denomination is essentially a spawn of a lust-addicted man and solely exists because of that man's lust. Really, that's pretty much what it's all about. Then that's when the book really gets into the Enlightenment, and I'm not going to lie, this is where I really wanted the book to be over. I was starting to itch at this point to read the other books that are on my shelf. And there was a very long section on Hegel and Schlegel and Schelling and Vico, and all of these guys this is the first time I'd ever heard of any of them. And that makes sense, because I'm a millennial, and I was brought up in a schooling system that probably didn't want me to know anything about these guys. So I'd never heard of any of them. The sections were super long, though, and I'm not going to lie, they felt like they dragged on. And we'll get into that. Then things picked up really good again on his chapter on Heisenberg and Jewish science and Jewish indecency. I'd never really thought about it from that perspective. And we'll talk about it in a bit, but that's where he really differs with the Kurgan in regards to, well, you'll see. I had never heard of Tomism, though I had certainly heard of Thomas Aquinas, and I think he's great, but I didn't realize that his philosophy was actually the dedicated system of philosophy for schools like Notre Dame and other Catholic universities in the United States, and there was a major struggle in the early 20th century to get Thomism out and replace it with Jewish science and philosophy, which is essentially where we live today and what we teach our kids in public schools. So at about page 630, I was wondering if there was going to be a conclusion, and there definitely was. I was wondering if the book was just kind of fall off a cliff, or if he was going to really conclude well. And I thought it really did conclude well, especially with his chapters on. Here, let me see. There were things about Pete Buttigieg in here, because I didn't realize how subversive and snaky that man comes from, and he comes from a family of subversive people who basically supplanted themselves inside the Catholic University of Notre Dame and turned it inside out into the monster it is today. But there's a whole section about Buttigieg. There's a section about a woman named Anne Liu. The book gets very personal for Jones in the end, which I thought was a pretty cool touch. In the whole beginning of the book, it's like a documentary, but then at the end he ties in his personal take, because he was literally across the street from Notre Dame, and he very much was the target of a lot of these people. I didn't really know that, and maybe a lot of you folks do, because you watch him talk to Owen Benjamin all the time. I have barely seen E. Michael Jones. I just know of the book, and I know that it was very well rated and anticipated, so I decided to get it. Oh yeah, another thing. I wrapped up the Kurgan's book as my last book, as you guys know, and they both have a pretty nice section dedicated to Kinsey, who was a real piece of shit and basically ruined our country, basically ruined our society, and is one of the founders of the sexual liberation of the 1960s, which has screwed everything up. By the way, Jones has a whole section about the Iranian Revolution of 1979, which essentially was a complete refutation of Americanism and freedom and sexual liberation that was happening in Iran at the time. And it's funny because I'm one of those, right-wingers that always saw the pictures of people in Iran and from the 50s and 60s and say, hey, look at all the women and what they used to look like in Iran before they were forced to cover up. And I got Jones's take on that, which is totally different. And it's like, dude, the Iranians wanted that. They hated what all that American and Western stuff that was invading their country. There was literally porn shops everywhere in Iran. It was really bad. So wouldn't be surprised if something like that happens in the United States at some point. I have a completely different opinion on the Iranian Revolution now based on this, and it's probably wasn't actually a bad thing, I'm going to be honest. I used to think it was. It probably wasn't. True to his interview with Vendi Radio, which I found out by the Kurgan, he told me about it. EMJ put a lot of the blame on what happened in Vatican II on them, parenthesis, the JQ, as opposed to the Freemasons. So Kurgan is all about, dude, it's the Masons. EMJ is like, nah, man, the Masons are super obsolete and basically useless today. It is them, parenthesis. So they differ on that pretty bigly. But yeah, it was a really long, drawn-out book. It felt like a documentary, and I could see it literally being like one of those BitChute documentaries. Your friend will send you a BitChute documentary that's like 10 or 15 hours long. That's basically what this book is, only it's written instead of on video. This book would actually make a great documentary called Logos Rising, the documentary by E. Michael Jones. Having someone narrate it, it would be great. It's a tough read, guys. Jones is very analytical and concise, but he's not entertaining. The book was just not entertaining for the most part. Some parts were pretty interesting and fascinating to read, but not entertaining, and maybe my attention span is garbage. But yeah, oh yeah, I have to point out they also bring up, Vatican II and the Code of Canon Law comes up in this book. It's not the focus of the book like the last book I just read, but it comes up. So it's interesting. It's so funny how the more books you read, the more they tie into other books you've read. But yeah, long drawn out book, but it absolutely does deserve a leather version. It would be very good for that format because we can make very large tomes. This thing would be a tome in leather with gold gilded pages. Absolutely. Would I read it again? Yeah, but not for 20 years. And in 20 years, I'm hoping that the book would have a documentary because I'd rather watch it in chunks, to be honest. It is a tough read, guys. It depends on your taste, but I didn't find it entertaining. And not to say that every book should be, but it's tough. It's like Meditations, probably a little bit tougher than that. God, even the Divine Comedy was more adventurous, right? So just know that, it's going to be a tough book to get through, and unless you're super nerdy, you're going to learn a lot, but it might take you a while, and you may have to force yourself to get through it. That's how it was for me. There were definitely times where literally I had to reread paragraphs because my mind, I caught myself thinking about other things as I was reading. So I had to reread paragraphs. If a book isn't entertaining for me, if it's not drawing me in that way, that happens a lot. So I have that problem. It might be particular to me or some other people, but that's basically what happened. And yeah, if it's a fiction book, I'm deep in it, man. And the next thing I know, the book's over. But not this. This was tough, but I learned a lot, and that's the most important thing for sure. So it's essentially a philosophy book with a theology twist. Let's see. Yeah, no, I'm pretty sure I've talked about everything. I would absolutely recommend getting it. It's a little bit on the pricey side, but he put a lot of work into it. So I think it's worth the $48 or the $60. So he's basically charging you $12 for his signature. That doesn't seem bad. Cool. Yeah. I'm going to read a much shorter book for my next book, though, folks. I've promised myself I'm not going to do another 700 or 800 pager for a moment or two for a few books. I think the next one is probably going to be Daedalus, which was recommended during a dark stream by Vox Day maybe a month ago. And I had to find it on Amazon. But I got a hard copy. It's pretty much falling apart because it's old, but it's very short. I'll probably finish that in a few days. And then there's my book, which will be coming out very soon. We'll do an announcement on that. But that is Logos Rising. Great book. Hard to read, but very informative. You will learn a ton. And if you force yourself to get through it, you'll come out a much more knowledgeable person. All right. That's it. Y'all have a good one.